Good to see you, Arthur.
I'm glad you're here this evening. I'd like to introduce you to the audience. And he is the author of Wicked Good Food, and I'd like to congratulate him on this episode.
Thank you very much. We're very excited to be here and looking forward to getting cooking.
Let's do it.
All right. So this evening we're going to make a couple things that are going to kind of help to warm us up a little bit as it's starting to get cool outside. Our main course is going to be a beef stew. We're going to use beef and some more aromatic vegetables, carrots, onion, celery. We're going to use some potato in there for a little bit of starch. We're also going to make an outstanding appetizer that's so quick and easy. It uses some just store-bought crescent rolls. We're going to add some blue cheese and a little bit of pear and bake those off in the oven. And then for dessert, we're going to have a little fire show for you as we're going to make some fresh bananas Foster. So I'm going to get going on the beef stew because that's going to take the longest. So I've got a pot here. It's been preheated a little bit. I want to get it on the stove. We go ahead and add a little bit of vegetable oil to it. And you want your pot pretty hot because when we go ahead and add our beef, what we're looking for is that we're actually going to brown the outside of the beef. So that sound that you hear, you want to hear that sound. And it's going to splatter a little bit, but that's okay. That means you're doing your job correctly. And so just move it around a little bit as you go. If you can spread it out into one nice flat layer, then you get a whole lot of browning. You want real even browning. Anything that's brown is flavor. It's really good flavor, and that's what we're looking for. So while that's browning, I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of fresh ground black pepper in there. Just a few twists. If you like more pepper, add a little more pepper. We're also going to add a pinch of kosher salt. And give it one last stir. And this is the most important part of making your beef stew. This is why I don't make my beef stew in a crock pot. It's because a crock pot can never do this. You can't get any browning on it. If you're going to make it in a crock pot, I would start it in a hot pan like this and then finish it in your crock pot. You can walk away and let it go nice, low and slow. But all that browning is going to add great flavor and color to our finished sauce. So while that's browning a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and get ready for our pears. So what I've done is taken a couple pears. It doesn't matter what kind of pear you use. Try to find the freshest, ripest pear. If it's locally in season, you know you're going to have a nice pear. We're going to take these, and I'm just going to cut off the side. And now I've got a nice flat area so it doesn't roll on me. Make another cut. So I've got 4 little cuts there like that. I'm going to take each one of these and make it into a little plank, essentially. And we're going to make them into a cut about that size. If you want to make a smaller appetizer, you can make these a little smaller. If you want it larger, we can make them a little larger. Now this is a dish that you could do with apples. It's a dish that you could do with pretty much any firm fruit like this. Now the cool thing about this is that this is one of those things that when you twist it, it pops, explodes in your hand. It's one of those crescent rolls. And so this is already pre-made. I'm going to go ahead and cut these about 1/4 inch. It's okay if I mash them a little bit. Go through and cut them all. Take a peek at our beef stew real quick. So you can see on the bottom of this pan all that wonderful brownness. Don't worry about that. Brown is a good thing. If you start to see something that's black, that's when it starts to burn and it's going to get bitter. But brown is good. So that's about all the color we're going to get out of there. I'm going to go ahead and add carrots, onion, and celery, which I diced up. Now eventually your pan's going to quiet down now because of all the moisture from your vegetables is going to go and it's going to cool down your pan. And that's a good thing. So we're just going to let that cook while we're working on this. Now each one of these, I'm going to take the palm of my hand and I'm going to flatten it out just a little bit. Just like that. So I'm going to take a few of these and I'll show you. And then we take our piece of pear, stick it right on there like so. Then a little bit of crumbled blue cheese. Just stick a little bit of that right on top. If you like lots of blue cheese, add a little more blue cheese. If you hate blue cheese, don't use blue cheese. You can use something else, whatever kind of cheese you like. Now all we're going to do is we're going to take one edge, we're going to flip it over, and we're going to let it rest right on the seam, just like that. And that's what we're going to do. So we're going to take a brief little break. I'm going to go ahead and make a few more of these. I'm going to stir this. We're going to let our vegetables sweat until our onions get a little translucent. Then we'll go on to the next step. All right, so while we were away, we gave this a little bit of time to cook all our vegetables. You can see in there that our onions are starting to turn translucent where we can see through them. I added some potatoes to it too. We're going to let those cook in with it. Now this is the point where we added a little bit of vegetable oil in the beginning, but it wasn't really enough for us to make a nice roux with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some butter to it. I'm going to let that melt right in there. That might seem like a lot of butter, and it is. It tastes good. But we're going to use butter as our fat. You have to have some sort of fat in there to mix with your flour so that when you add your liquid, you get a nice thickener. All right, so far this is pretty traditional beef stew. This is where I kind of go stray off a little bit. I was on a camping trip once with Boy Scouts, and we decided to make beef stew. We had some leftover steak tips from something, and we had some vegetables. But it just wasn't tasting great, and I thought we needed something else to give it a little more body. So what I actually had was ketchup. So I'm going to add some ketchup right to this. Now if you think about it, ketchup is tomatoes, and it's sugar, and there's vinegar in there. So you've got this richness from the tomatoes, and you have some acid from the vinegar, and you have some sweetness. And what we want to do is we want to let this cook. By cooking it, you get rid of some of that acidity, and you'll get rid of that tomato flavor, and it'll really blend the flavors well into our finished dish. So you want to let that cook for just a minute or two. Then I'm going to turn my heat pretty low. And this is the point at which we want to add our flour. Now this flour will essentially coat all our vegetables. And we're going to make a roux again, which is going to be our thickening agent. Now just like we don't want this to taste ketchup-y, you're not going to want it to be floury. So once again, cooking it will help get rid of some of that flouriness. I don't even know if that's a word, flouriness. We're going to use it. All right. So now we're going to let this hang out. We'll stir it every minute or two and as it cooks and as our roux cooks. Now, we can look back at these. So I finished rolling these all up. They look great. The last thing we want to do is brush them with a little bit of butter. You don't have to brush them with butter, but it's going to help a little bit to have a little browning on the outside. So I have just a little melted butter. This is unsalted butter. I don't really think you need the salt. Our cheese is plenty salty enough. I'm just going to dab a little butter on top of each of these. Now this is something you can definitely do ahead. I could do these now and serve them tomorrow or the next day. And I would put them right into the pan you're gonna bake them in and just wrap them in some plastic wrap and stick them in your refrigerator. One thing you want to be aware of is they'll take an extra few minutes to cook. And they might look kind of funny when you take them out of the refrigerator because you'll see that the butter that you put on there has actually solidified. But that's fine. When you go to bake them, the butter will melt right into it and they're going to be awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and pop these in the oven. These are going to take 5 or 7 minutes at about 375 degrees. So I'm going to check back at this. So another thing there's 2 other ingredients we're going to add to this that are going to give us our liquid. One of them is a traditional beef stew, but beef stock, excuse me. But if we go back to that night camping, we had apple juice. And I added some apple juice. And that also added a nice little bit of sweetness. Not so much that it tastes like apple juice or it's really sweet, but we're going to add some apple juice to this. So we're going to let this go ahead and cook. We're going to let it cook for about 10 more minutes. When we come back, we'll add our liquids to this. We'll let that cook down and we'll get ready to do our dessert, which is going to be an outstanding Bananas Foster. All right, so as you can see, this has started to change a little bit. It's changed in color. It's gotten a little bit thicker. You can really see some of the redness that's in the flour, and that comes from our ketchup that we added to it. So now's the time where you want to add your liquid. And your liquid you don't want it to be hot. If you add hot liquid to a hot roux, you'll end up with tiny little roux balls again. And you want to really start slow so you can dissolve it all. Let me walk over here and grab my liquids. So we're going to add some beef broth. Now if you're concerned about your sodium, you can use low sodium beef broth. If you have beef stock, you can use beef stock. It doesn't really matter. If you don't have either of those things, you can use some water and some beef bouillon. This would be kind of a hard dish to make vegetarian though, the whole beef stew thing. But, all right, so I'm going to need to add a little bit more. And like I said, I'm going to add a little bit of apple juice to this. But the beef broth is our main liquid. The apple juice is going to add some sweetness and a little bit of acidity, but we don't want it to be sweet. We don't want our finished dish to be sweet. So I'm only going to add about half a cup. Does that look like half a cup? You'll notice that I'm not measuring as I go. It's because I've had some experience. I've done these recipes before.